Hello everybody, I'm Casey and welcome to another edition of Let's Talk About. And welcome back to Look Back at The Lion King. Well, here we are. We're finally going to talk about one of these live action things Disney keeps insisting on doing with Lion King 2019. And I wanted to use Look Back at the Lion King to show why this remake is the one that is finally breaking my apathetic silence on this often called out topic here on YouTube. As much as I've never been crazy about these live action remakes just conceptually, and honestly word of mouth never did anything to change my mind on that, I mostly left them alone because, for a while, I wasn't particularly attached enough to the classics they were adapting to comment on them. I don't care about the Jungle Book. I did see Beauty and the Beast, which was and I've yet to see Aladdin, despite hearing that it was fine, though I do plan to give it a chance, but then I heard that this was in the works. This is the straw that broke the camel's back, ladies and gents. As I hope I've made it clear over the last month, I feel The Lion King is one of Disney's greatest achievements on an artistic and narrative level. I know not everyone agrees with me there, and that's fine, you do you, but I still stand by that and how much this movie means to me personally. So on an objective and subjective level, I feel this is one of the most well-developed movies Disney has ever made. So the fact that they were not only remaking it, but doing it in the middle of a trend that just doesn't seem to be working or furthering the art form, I was not happy. I'll just leave it at that. But you know what? The cast seemed pretty good. Jon Favreau is a great director. So I decided to sit back and see how it turned out. And how did that go? Let's talk about it, shall we? I don't really do many negative reviews, so in my continued attempts to express the more optimistic side of my viewing experiences, and to be fair towards a franchise that has been so good to me, I'm going to point out some of the things that I don't hate. But I gotta be honest, there's not much. While I will have quite a few things to say about this, the animation on a purely technical level is pretty gorgeous. Having pure programming look like living animals is no easy feat. A team of very capable VFX artists clearly worked really hard to make this look as true to life as possible. Even the backgrounds and landscapes are completely computer generated, which I didn't know. So even if I think there are points where it's dull and I don't see the point to them looking like actual animals, that was the vision for this movie, and on a purely aesthetic level, it is kind of impressive. Bonsai and Ed have been replaced completely by... Hang on, I've got to look this up. Oh, Kamari and Azizi. Forgive me, they never say their names in the movie. Which is a shame because these two are probably the best change in the movie, making them effective comic relief without making them idiots. They're still funny, and that's all they need to be. It just works. They did get a pretty good voice cast together, although again, there are quite a few weak branches there, but still, when I heard who was going to be playing each part, I nodded and went, okay, I could see this. The standouts to me are Chiwetel Ejiofor as a more subdued but still menacing Scar, John Oliver as an even more exasperated Zazu, which was apparently possible and hilarious, and I loved it. The addition of having John Connie as Rafiki speak in South African dialect, and Billy Eichner's Timon. And just the fact that I can say that Eichner is a solid Timon when he's competing against Nathan Lane is a compliment on a whole other level. Turns out he can sing pretty well too. Not on Lane's level, but still. Why does he sing more often? And while Seth Rogen's Pumbaa is a little too much Seth Rogen and not enough Pumbaa for me, I do appreciate they kept the chemistry between these two. At points they start to sound like an old married couple, which is probably not too far off actually. But if the role called for singing...
Kuna Matata, it ain't no passing craze.
Yeah, just leave it to Timon this time.
Amateur, lie down before you hurt yourself.
Except for during the Lion Sleeps Tonight song. That was so fun and bouncy, and it may have been the best scene in the whole movie. And that's sort of it. Honestly, most of the good things I have to say about this movie have a bad thing sneaking up right behind it, so let's just get this over with and do the full-on deep dive. Like with my review of the original movie, I guess as good a place to start as any is the animation, which continues to baffle me. I know this is an ancient remark towards this movie at this point, but why make a live-action version of a Disney movie with no people or domesticated animals? Yeah, people still love and remember The Lion King, and that seems to be the only criteria needed to greenlight one of these remakes, but what benefit is there to telling the story with more realistic looking animals who are still animated? kinda badly. Now I know that's weird to say after I just said the animation is technically impressive, and that's what I mean. On a technical level, it is quite an accomplishment. But on an artistic level, yes, I will admit seeing things like the animals gathering around Pride Rock during the Circle of Life opening, and that one shot of Mufasa looking over the Pride Lands that they showed in every freaking trailer, are impressive and kinda cool to see how those moments look with real life animals. But once the movie actually has to tell the story, this style falls flat on its face. I feel like I'd be more impressed with this if the moments I mentioned were part of a Lion King in real life video on YouTube or something, from an animation studio trying to show off what they're capable of visually. Kinda like how we all thought Apocalypse looked cool for a 2-minute video, but there's probably a reason why Detective Pikachu doesn't look like Apocalypse. The most common criticism towards this movie is how expressionless and blank all the characters are throughout the film, and they really are. This is supposed to be a story wrapped with emotion, from innocence to majesty to fear to grief to hatred to humor to love to determination. And wow, just look at how wonderfully all of that is conveyed here. Look at how mischievous Simba is, how full of hatred Scar is, how comforting Mufasa looks, how Timon's scheming nature is planted right on his signature grin. Yeah, I think you get the idea. Everyone just looks so bored and stilted. John Oliver may deliver a great performance as Zazu, but it's tough to appreciate the first time you watch this because all you can see are his dead eyes and beak that never ever moves in an interesting way. But the one who suffers the most from this is Simba, since he's the one who's supposed to be going through the most difficult emotionally transformative journey in the movie. But whether it's as a cub or as a full-grown lion, his face more or less stays exactly the same. They managed to make him smile once about an hour in the middle of the wildebeest stampede, and it might be the most wonderful sight in the movie. And enjoy it while you can, folks, because it never happens again. In fact, the stampede is probably where this problem is the most prominent, at least as far as I'm concerned. I mean, does this look like a little kid who's about to get trampled by hundreds of wildebeest? Does this look like a king desperately clinging to life, begging his double-crossing brother to save him? Does this look like the face of a child who just lost his father in a horrific accident? No! Simba looks exactly like he does through the rest of the damn movie. A $250 million budget and they couldn't animate a couple of tears? Are you kidding me? And before anyone throws that line of, well, real animals can emote that way, so you can't do it in this movie. First of all, if that's the case, then I reiterate, why make a movie in this style in the first place? Second, these are not real animals. They are computer-generated images. And having CG characters react in an expressive way in a realistic environment is hardly unheard of. Detective Pikachu and His Dark Materials just this year did a remarkable job of that. Guardians of the Galaxy, one of Marvel, and by extension Disney's most profitable franchises, has a main character who is a computer-animated, realistic-looking mutated raccoon who was one of the most popular and emotional characters in the series. And as a lot of people pointed out, The Chronicles of Narnia, a movie that came out almost 15 years ago and produced by Disney, had a CG, realistic-looking lion as an essential character who was far more expressive than any other character in this much more advanced and more expensive film. This is not impossible. This would not have broken the immersion. This is not that hard. This might seem like an obvious statement, but without letting your characters be expressive in abstract ways that we can empathize with, it makes it tougher to connect with them. Mufasa's death isn't sad because it happened, but because of how Simba reacts to it. Without the joy on their faces, Simba and Nala's reunion feels hollow, and Simba's return to Pride Rock is robbed of a lot without his anger towards Scar and love towards his mother. If we can't tell what the characters are feeling, why should we care what happens to them? Calling them the same names isn't enough. You have to earn that care and sympathy on your own. And this time around, I just do not care about almost anyone in this movie. And the character designs are so realistic that it goes back to being bland and uninteresting. None of them have unique characteristics to make them more distinct. You know a movie has a problem when fan artists flock to the internet to recreate the designs and render concepts much more appealing than the major studio produced. Once Simba grows up, he looks exactly exactly like Mufasa to the point that the "he lives in you" moment leaves no impact. And trust me, we'll come back to this moment. I get what they were going for with Scar by making him look more lean and dirty, but it just looks ugly, not to mention you can barely see his defining characteristic. Like Zazu, Timon has these expressionless, barely visible eyes, and why isn't Pumbaa red? You might think that was just a cartoonish liberty from the animated movie, but no. When warthogs roll around in dirt, they turn the same color of that dirt, which sometimes is bright red. But no, we can't have creative color choices, so now he just looks blech. Speaking of which, something I don't hear people crying out about is the color scheme, which is just so drab and dull. Sure, a lot of pictures of wild animals in the African savanna consist of yellows and more toned down greens, but that's not always the case. You know where you can see that? In the location photos from the team that made the original animated movie. The lush greens, the overwhelming red and orange sunrises and sunsets, all were inspired by actual landscapes the production team witnessed, if slightly exaggerated. Look, I'm not asking for each scene to look like one of Simba's power fantasies, but it really says something when I genuinely have a hard time telling the difference between the Pride Lands in their prime and when Scar took over.
Pretty colors.
It's brown!
But while the animation leaves a lot to be desired, the soundtrack is pretty lively. There are weak spots like everywhere in this movie, like how Beyonce is overselling it so much during Can You Feel the Love Tonight that you can barely hear Glover, and the song they added clearly just so she could have a song all her own is painfully out of place. You want to give Beyonce a song as Nala so desperately, and you don't include Shadowland? But I Just Can't Wait to Be King seems to be using the Broadway arrangement, which is appreciated, and is probably the best song in the movie performance-wise, though the staging, again, leaves a lot to be desired, having all of its imagination erased in favor of the group running around in circles. And a big running joke around this movie was a glaring issue during a song with a very specific title.
Can you feel the love tonight?
Yeah, more like Can You Feel the Love in broad freaking daylight. Not even at sunset? Really? And the one that got everybody in an uproar, What They Did to Be Prepared. Which, yeah, it was bad. Now, the new arrangement isn't really the problem. The rhythmic march is in the same vein as the original, and I don't even mind the lyric changes. No, the problem is that they hacked the number up more than Thanksgiving dinner. It's built up way too slowly, and once it starts gaining some of the energy and menace we loved, it's over. It feels like it was added at the last minute out of fear of outcry that it was cut, which, make no mistake, would have happened, but the end result doesn't do the song justice and feels like it just wants to get it over with instead of giving Scar his time to shine. It's just awful.
Your music's bad and you should feel bad.
But even if these were the most charismatic animals ever to be brought to film, that's not the only problem. The animation may not be all there, but the writing is pretty phoned in too, with half-realized motivations and contributions from practically everyone involved. This movie seems to be trying to do something a lot of these live-action remakes do, which is fix the original story. But Lion King has this problem in that they start to try and fix certain things, which either makes things more inconsistent or leads to a lot of lines of dialogue and plot points that don't go anywhere or add anything. Stuff like hinting at past tension between Mufasa and Scar that we don't really need, but doesn't matter because it's never expanded on. Scar's alliance with the hyenas appearing to be proposed at the last minute and not through years of clever deceit. The hyenas themselves having a deeper grudge against Mufasa beyond just being ravenous scavengers that's never made quite clear. Rafiki's staff not showing up until the climax, and then him calling it his old friend. Timon and Pumbaa now living with several animals despite supposedly being outcasts who do nothing and have no connections to either them or Simba, and showing Nala fleeing the Pride Lands just because. The list goes on and on. Then there's poor Sarabi. Boy, did they want her to be more important than she is. Now, I'm all for expanding characters, but once again, it's pretty half-baked. There's a line about her helping Mufasa defend the land from the hyenas, which is pretty cool. But not only is she back in time to permit Simba to go to the watering hole, but we never get to actually see her in action with Mufasa. If she's just as essential as he is to defend the kingdom, why doesn't she strike when, I don't know, her only son is being attacked by an entire pack of their enemies? What the hell. Also, Scar keeps wanting Sarabi to become his queen. Ew. Now, Scar, what would Zira think of that? Surprisingly, a character who they give a more prominent role to that, for the most part, works is Zazu, making him more of a voice of reason rather than a nag or a stick in the mud, and having him be more proactive in the second half is something I really appreciated. I'm not saying there isn't room for expanding or even improving on the original story. If you want an excellent example of that, look no further than the Broadway show, which does an amazing job of transforming and expanding on the source material without hurting its integrity. This version, on the other hand, feels like they were thinking of ways of expanding on the story of the Lion King, but were either afraid to out of fear of backlash, or just didn't bother fleshing these concepts out, and instead leaves the story bogged down with information and half-baked ideas that adds nothing and goes nowhere. But aside from the pointless additions, aside from the lack of emotion in most of the performances and animation, aside from Be Prepared, all of that aside, possibly the biggest issue with Lion King 2019 is that it has a real pacing problem, which isn't surprising considering the movie is 30 minutes longer, but hardly anything of significance has been expanded on, which leads to not only some sequences being stretched out to an almost comical length, but it oddly leads to important, essential moments being rushed through, times where the characters really take in a moment or a realization, and again, giving us time to sympathize and even relate to them. One of the best examples of this to me is Simba and Nala's reunion. In the new movie, once Simba recognizes her, Nala immediately realizes that this is Simba. You know, the friend she thought had been dead for several years. In the original movie, it took her a few seconds to process. She was confused at how this lion in the middle of the jungle recognized her, then is so overwhelmed by the fact that he's alive, it takes her a second to remember what that means. And that sense of relief and something even deeper is so overwhelming that it doesn't stop after Simba's dismissive about becoming king. They don't spend time on the connections, the vital moments where characters process complicated feelings and forge bonds or cause conflicts. Instead of being so overwhelmed that your best friend and only hope is alive that you forget the darker things for a moment, Nala telling Simba about Scar's terrible reign before Can You Feel Love Tonight comes across as her being wishy-washy and possibly more neglectful than Simba. I might be a bit more understanding here if, again, the movie wasn't half an hour longer. And instead of spending that time on, I don't know, expanding minor characters in a significant way or digging deeper into the rich characters you've already been given, they cut down on the stuff that matters and drag out the weirdest scenes. The moment where this becomes clear, and the moment that might have broken me watching this, was this. Remember that scene in the animated movie where Rafiki finds some weeds that Simba touched and from that figures out he's alive? The journey that took about 10 seconds? Well, here, the evidence that Simba is alive takes a journey that lasts 2 whole minutes. We see every inch of this little clump of feline follicles journey, right down to it winding up with the rewards of a dung beetle. And I thought this movie was crap before. Now, it is literally forcing me to watch actual crap roll across the screen because it is essential to the plot.
That is one big pile of shit.
I know some people who burst out laughing because of how ridiculous this was, but I was just too stunned that it was even happening. Why is this, of all things, so important that we need to spend so much time on it? Why were essential emotional beats and character contemplation sacrificed, but so much time is dedicated to this little plot point? Something that, I'll remind you, can be accomplished in 10 seconds flat. It is one of 2 scenes that to me encapsulates everything that is wrong with this movie and how it fails as a remake. The other is one of the many recreations of iconic scenes. There are a lot of instances of them failing to recreate iconic and important moments from the original movie. One of the most obvious is probably how much less impressive Rafiki's presentation of Simba is when they have to adhere to actual mandrill anatomy, but we're gonna focus on one in particular, arguably the most important and impactful sequence in the movie, where Simba is guided by Rafiki to his father's spirit. And this is a scene that they ruined the most. Poor Rafiki has been drained of all of his eccentric personality traits, Simba's dialogue is still stilted and awkward, and once we get to the big moment, instead of the awe-inspiring image of the majestic long-gone king enveloping the sky, Simba is just talking to clouds. Just regular clouds, with no abstract imagery, no creative color choices, and with the voice acting constantly phoning it in, with poor James Earl Jones clearly just collecting a paycheck, it feels like they care about this moment about as much as the audience does right now. And if that wasn't enough, remember how Simba still needs a bit of a push and they have that fun, creative, and clever way of helping him come to his realization by Rafiki whacking him on the head?
Ow! Jeez, what was that for? It doesn't matter. It's in the past.
Well, remember, this is the realistic Lion King, so no fun or cleverness is allowed, and we have to get to the next important scene, and clearly they didn't think that scene was important, because they just skip it all together. I am not kidding. The moment that presents the entire theme of the movie, where everything comes together in beautiful simplicity, they just decided that we don't need it. Like I said in my review of the original movie, this is the moment where I feel the Lion King was elevated into something special, a powerful moment in the world of animation that would be deeply remembered. And the fact that they butchered it so horrendously in this remake once again encapsulates everything that is wrong with this movie. Expressionless animation, dull set pieces, stilted dialogue and voice performances, half-hearted recreations of beautiful and nuanced moments from a remarkable film, and the lack of personal care to do the source material justice beyond just getting to the next scene people kind of recognize. All I felt as this movie wrapped up was frustration. That I didn't care if Simba defeated Scar. That it bugged me how another awe-inspiring moment, when Simba finally does ascend to the throne, is a poorly shot stroll up the rock with no impact. Also, the music was out of sync, which was annoying. And how much I feel nothing when the Pride Lands are restored. And Timon and Pumbaa don't get to stand on top of Pride Rock at the end anymore? Boo! Ugh. Overall, this is not the worst movie ever made. It has some good qualities and people behind it who were clearly trying to make this impossible premise work, and it did not ruin my childhood. However, it is still a soulless, hollow reimagining that fails on every major level, as an adaptation and a movie on its own. Another thing I wanted to illustrate with Look Back at the Lion King is how the original movie, remarkable as it is, isn't untouchable or immune to quality change. Simba's Pride showed that you can continue these characters' story with the same level of care, even if it's on a smaller scale. Lion King 1.5 shows that you can care about even the comic relief characters, while having a bit of fun at the source material's expense. And even though I didn't get to it, the Broadway musical shows that you can expand on the story, make multiple changes, and drastically change the visual style while maintaining the same level of quality and engagement that the original Impossible project accomplished. This didn't have to go this badly. As great as The Lion King is, there are clearly ways for it to grow, but nothing is gained from this adaptation aside from maybe a greater respect for the original. I've watched this movie twice, and after finishing it the second time, I wondered for a moment if I'd like this movie more if I didn't have the original to compare it to. And no, probably not. I might admire some of the stuff it tries to do, but the execution is so poor that it would just come off as wasted potential. The animation is technically impressive, but is so free to deviate from realism and be abstract in any way that it just leaves a dull husk behind. The voice acting has some bright spots, but could have been better, and it takes shortcuts in the areas of investment that truly matter at the cost of any emotional investment the audience might have had, or anything resembling depth. I didn't have high hopes for this movie, and yet it still managed to disappoint. And it does hurt that this movie made more money than the original by a wide margin, and that a movie this devoid of the elements that get most invested in a film, that turned off Elton John and several animators that created the story in the first place on and off the record, is going to be Disney's new highest grossing animated film of all time, kinda stings. With all that said though, I know there are people who like this movie. Maybe you found the gimmick of seeing the iconic moments from The Lion King recreated with realistic looking animals appealing. Maybe you were able to connect with the characters again in a way that me and many others just weren't able to. And I'm not here to take that away from you. Lord knows I'm no stranger to having the minority opinion on things I enjoy. So take comfort in the fact that this movie is a joy in your life that I just do not have. And this doesn't make me optimistic for some other remakes connected to Disney classics I'm attached to that are in the works. I mean, how hard is it to revisit a classic Disney property in a way that captures the spirit of the original while still being fresh and creative? Can you imagine what that would be like?
Mary Poppins.
Now we're talking.